Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to the Politics Guys with your hosts, Jay Carson and Michael Baranowski.
Welcome to the Politics Guys. I'm Michael Baranowski, a political scientist at Northern Kentucky University. My co-host this week, as always, is Cleveland area attorney and sometime Republican strategist Jay Carson. Before we get to the news, I want to let everyone know that next week's show will be up a little later than normal. We usually tape Sunday mornings, but next Sunday, my wife and I will be driving back from the Midwest Political Science Association conference in Chicago, where we're both delivering papers.
That's exciting.
Oh, yeah. Well, we tend to do it every year, and so this year I have a paper on how the Netflix show House of Cards affects students' view of politics.
And how does it affect?
I taught this course where the course material, the book, as it were, was House of Cards, and it's not surprisingly, it makes cynical students even more cynical about politics, which is hard to believe because they're already pretty cynical, though they really enjoyed it a lot. So they reveled in their cynicism, I guess, is the result. So I don't really know if I should be trying to make students more cynical exactly, but there it is. So.
Well, sounds interesting.
Well, let's hope so. Anyway, so. Just want to let everyone.
Is there going to be video of that we can post somewhere?
Oh God, no.
Oh, okay. That would
be truly awful. But if anyone's interested in the paper, I'd be happy to send it to you. Just send us an email, mail@politicsguys.com, and you can get my very own research paper on the politics of House of Cards and how it makes cynical students even more cynical. All right, on to this week's show, and we start yet again with the status of the ongoing Russia investigation. This week, the House Intelligence Committee's probe ground to a halt engineered by the committee's chair, Devin Nunes, who Democrats argue is actually working with the White House to torpedo the investigation. Now, the Senate inquiry is much less of a farce, with a strong show of bipartisanship between Intelligence Committee Chair Richard Burr and Ranking Democratic member Mark Warner. Now, also this week, former Trump National Security Advisor Mike Flynn volunteered to testify about Trump campaign ties to Russia, that is, if he receives immunity. And that's a stance that his former boss, President Trump, publicly supported, despite the fact that both Trump and Flynn have repeatedly said that anyone who asks for immunity is almost certainly guilty of something. President Trump continues to contend that the investigations are a hoax that Democrats are focusing on because they're electoral sore losers, despite the fact that Republicans in both the House and the Senate support investigating. So what do you make of this week's developments, Jay?
Well, first, I think to say that the House investigation is ground to a halt, I'm not sure that's exactly accurate. There's been nothing new coming out there, but
Nunes did cancel. He did cancel a number of hearings and so forth for the week. So
sure, but canceling hearings is different from saying the investigation's off. We're done here.
Fair enough. The momentum has slowed. How about that?
Momentum has slowed. Absolutely. No, I'd agree with you on that.
Okay.
And that may likely be a good thing. In terms of let's get everyone up to speed and see what documents, what details. That Chairman Nunes has that Democrats haven't seen yet, so that we're all on the same page. So I think that's good there. When it comes to the immunity issue, I guess that's sort of as a lawyer. Listen, if I'm Mike Flynn's lawyer, absolutely that's the deal I'm going to insist on. Not because he's guilty or may not be guilty, but because that's the deal I'd insist on, because. To do otherwise would sort of risk malpractice for me. I think we both talked that could there be a technical violation in speaking of the oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the name of the act, the 1790.
Right, I know the one you're talking about. Sure.
The how embarrassing. Anyway, the act that forbids personal foreign policy making. Again, that no one's ever been prosecuted under. Sure, I think there could be a technical violation there. And would someone make political sport of trying to prosecute him for that? Yes. So I understand that. But I do think it might be, listen, if you want to have an investigation, part of an investigation often entails granting immunity to key witnesses so that you can learn more. And there's certainly precedent for that happening in investigations of Democrats.
Sure, but
the Hillary's aides, and there was even the hammer smashing of cell phones. But that's I think it's embarrassing for Flynn and Trump to have made those statements of if you seek immunity, you must be guilty. That's politics.
So presumably they don't feel that way anymore.
Oh, I don't know.
Or is it? Sorry,
how they feel.
Is it when you seek immunity, you're guilty, but when I seek immunity, it's just because I'm just pursuing a smart legal strategy.
Right. Well, no,
and
I think
of course
it's a matter of everybody's playing the game.
Sure.
And if the other side
right.
says I want immunity, the natural response for your side to say is you must be guilty.
Yeah.
I think that's just sort of the standard move that you always make. But that doesn't change the fact that immunity may be a necessary tool to get to the bottom of the investigation. Now,
let me ask you this. You don't think that Nunes is at all compromised given what he's done? I mean, Democrats are calling for him to step down. You don't think that there are any concerns about his very close ties to the White House and sort of the activities he's been involved in? Or do you think that he's still capable of being an impartial chair of this committee that's investigating a president who he seems to stand very, very strongly behind?
I think it's okay until we've seen more evidence. I mean, the idea is that, look, he is a Trump loyalist. All right, fair enough. That's probably what you might expect when you have a chairman who's of the same party. But let's see where the evidence leads. I don't see anything yet that he's done that would, in your words, again, grind an investigation to a halt. It certainly lost momentum. We'll see what happens down the road, but
you can understand why Democrats are concerned.
With the idea that everyone has to recuse themselves or step aside, just because they may have some relationship with the president or to be on the same party as the president.
Sure, but given what's happened, I imagine you can understand why Democrats are concerned.
Right, and that's why I think he ought to have some system and move forward and make sure that whatever information he's had access to is shared to the entire committee, and that everyone's on the same page as we move forward. Now, I mean, if the situation remains where Nunes gets information, receives information, makes statements, but then doesn't release the information, I mean, that's obviously problematic, and you got to be called on it at that point. But I don't think we're at that point yet.
Yeah. Well,
as we said last week, I mean, I think the issue was it was a terrible political rollout when he just sort of botched the announcement of whatever it is he's got. And again, the frustrating thing that I keep coming back to in this kind of investigation is there's so much that we just don't know, and we don't know what we don't know.
One thing I wanted to point out is that there's sort of a history of when there are House and Senate investigations, that the House investigation tends to be a lot more partisan. The Senate tends to be the more sort of grown up, mature, responsible, bipartisan branch or chamber. Sorry. I was thinking about, back in the mid-'70s, where you had House and Senate investigations of CIA activity or illegality. On the Senate side, you had the Church Commission, and on the House side, you had the Pike Commission, and the Pike Commission basically just fell apart in the partisan bickering, whereas the Church Commission actually led to something. And so this kind of follows a very sort of long-standing trend of the Senate being, in a sense, better equipped, I guess you could say, institutionally or by tradition, to conduct a fairer, more impartial investigation. So it's not really any surprise, at least not to me.
I think that's probably right. Again, the institutions are different. for a whole number of reasons. I mean, the terms of which the representatives or senators serve, longer Senate terms gives you a longer perspective. The bigger, district, so to speak, of a senator often leads to having to take more moderate positions than a smaller House district, and there are other, just again, historical institutional factors that lead the Senate to be more deliberative. So I think that's probably right, and again, that's maybe my point of let's not beat up on Nunes too much until we know more.
Okay, and for a while now, President Trump has been saying that the real issues here are first leakers and then, and much more wildly and irresponsibly, what he claimed was wiretapping of Trump Tower by the Obama administration during the campaign. And, despite the fact that there's no evidence of this and that it's been denied by, the intelligence community, the Obama administration, and all Republicans with access to the intelligence information, that is, except President Trump. And despite all this, Republican voters seem to be buying into President Trump's alternate reality. There was a new poll from CBS that came out this week, said that 3 out of 4 Republicans believe that it was somewhat likely that Trump's offices were wiretapped before the election. So what do you think's going on here with this, Jay?
I think that might be maybe the inexactitude of the phrasing.
Okay.
And what and it sort of plays into, we talked about this a couple weeks ago, when Trump just says stuff, and he is notoriously imprecise, but everybody sort of knows what he's saying. So for example, when he says, "Hey, my wires were tapped," which is just a wonderful phrase, and we really ought to use it more. What he meant, and this is Sean Spicer said this, was he was under some sort of surveillance investigation, whether or not it was actual wiretapping pursuant to a FISA warrant, and the target was Trump Tower and so forth, that he was somehow surveilled. And that's sort of what the Devin Nunes has come out with, this so-called smoking gun, which we haven't really seen yet, which indicates that there were other investigations going forward in which Trump associates had been swept up.
Which is a vastly different thing from saying they were surveilled.
Sort of an incredible idea. And in the mind of the typical voter, the idea that, hey, if someone is listening to your phone calls one way or another, regardless of who the target was, regardless of what the building was, and regardless of why, I mean, if you say wiretap, that's fits with what they understand wiretapping to be.
I understand your point, and I think you're right probably in part there. But let's be clear: when they talk about being incidentally swept up, that's something along the lines of if they're investigating some foreign nationals or something, and they mention a Trump associate, well, then that's incidentally swept up. So I want to make sure that listeners aren't taking away from this the fact that you're arguing. I don't think you're arguing that there was any direct surveillance or any evidence of direct surveillance of Donald Trump or his associates by U.S. intelligence agencies, because, in fact, these same intelligence agencies said that is exactly what did not happen.
Well,
let's be clear on that.
For example, the Mike Flynn conversation with the Russian ambassador. I mean, that's sort of the example I would look to is, yes, we're conducting standard intelligence surveillance of the Russian ambassador because he's a foreign national. Right. He's the Russian ambassador. And, hey, we've got a allegedly, because no one's really seen the transcript yet, but I think that there's enough to believe that that's what happened, a conversation between him and Mike Flynn. And that's sort of what I mean. Now, again, the statements have been that Flynn was not the target of the investigation, that was just standard, foreign intelligence surveillance. So again, those are the things I don't know. But to your point, as far as what the average voter thinks, they think that if someone's name gets mentioned or thrown into this, that's sort of the equivalent of wiretapping. Yeah, I'd agree that there's no evidence to show at this point that there are actual wiretaps aimed at any Trump associates, other than, again, we have the weird sort of Jim Comey statements a couple weeks ago saying, well, yes, there is an investigation. And I guess to conclude, well, there's an investigation, but there's no, attempted surveillance or interception of communications as part of that investigation.
No, I don't think that's the case at all. I think those things I don't think are inconsistent in that there can be an investigation, and if the Russians are the target, and the Russians certainly would be the target of that, if a hostile government is trying to influence our elections, we would investigate them, and if in the course of that investigation we pick up information on people that they are being helped with in that process, and they happen to be Trump campaign folks, well, that doesn't mean they were the initial targets of the investigation, but that's sort of
I agree 100% with that.
Okay.
I think that's what I'm saying. That's
Oh,
what
okay.
I'm trying to say.
Gotcha. Moving on, a story that kind of made it a good week to be a Democrat in a way. The Republican sort of circular firing squad in the wake of their healthcare failure continues this week. And, President Trump launched a series of Twitter attacks against the House Freedom Caucus, and he actually even called out several members by name. But I think his tirade, I'll call it that, might not have much effect on their future votes, thanks, number one, to secure districts, and also the Freedom Caucus members got some support from some pretty powerful conservative organizations like Heritage Action for America, Freedom Works, Family Research Council, which really kind of blasted back at President Trump. And, these same conservative groups have been pushing for the House to try again on health care, and there are some people who actually believe the House might actually give it another go. What are your thoughts on this, Jay?
Well, again, it's always a little weird. Presidents attacking congressmen by name. That seems just be an outsized sort of response. But again, we're in a world where the president regularly attacks sort of B-list comedians and so forth.
Here's a guy who takes everything personally.
Yeah.
Nothing is just politics with him.
Yeah. And again, it seems if I'm the president, you typically don't want to elevate your opponents by naming them and we're sort of raising their status.
Yeah.
Which I think he sort of has done right here. That said, I think he's got every right to blast them. I disagree with the way he does it and the whole use of Twitter. We had discussed this earlier. Yeah. I think that what happened with the Freedom Caucus taking this, making the perfect the enemy of the good, I think is a bad choice, and they should have taken incremental steps. So we'll see what they come back with.
Well, there were some pretty interesting responses from some of the people who he called out. Representative Garrett from Virginia, he posted back a thing saying Stockholm syndrome, kind of suggesting that Trump has basically become a captive of Paul Ryan and the establishment agenda. But I think maybe my favorite response was from Thomas Massey from Kentucky, who said it's a swamp, not a hot tub. We both came here to drain it, which I thought was great. But anyway, so I don't really think that this helps out either the Freedom Caucus or the president. But certainly, Well,
I would say it helps out the Freedom Caucus, if anybody. And again,
okay.
It's one of these situations where this is a fight that Trump didn't need to have.
No, exactly. And we talked about this last week and weeks before. Oftentimes, he's his own worst enemy. Although he has some other pretty big enemies as well. So, but yeah, I don't really see this coming to any kind of a great conclusion because Donald Trump has definitely demonstrated he's not the sort of guy to back off, and the Freedom Caucus has sort of made a point of being the sort of group that isn't interested in compromise or backing off. So you kind of have a movable object and an irresistible force here, and I don't know what the end result of this is, but it's certainly not good. Unless you're a Democrat.
Unless you're a Democrat.
Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway, before I move on, we'd like to thank our new supporters this week. Our first new supporter, a very generous donor through PayPal who asked to remain anonymous. So I won't mention your name, but you know who you are, I know who you are, and we want to thank you again. Your contribution is a big help to the show.
Thank you very much.
Next, we have Taj, our newest Patreon monthly sustaining contributor, who writes, "Hey guys, I'm an artist in Kansas City. I found your show while trying to find good, calm, and open political discussions. I look forward to your show every week, and the interviews are great to listen to any time. In President Trump's proposed budget, there are, as is no shock to anyone, a ton of cuts to what he and many Republicans call wasteful spending. The future for the NEA, NPR, and PBS is not looking great. The arts are essential to any complete national life, and the state owes it to itself to sustain and encourage them. As Winston Churchill said, "Ill fares the race which fails to salute the arts with the reverence and delight which are their due." Both FDR and JFK believed that artists were caretakers of mankind's vision for who and what we are as a people and a nation. And as President Lyndon Johnson put it, art is our nation's most precious heritage. I wanted to get both of your takes on the role that government should have with regards to support and investment in the arts. Thanks again for always trying to show different sides on important issues. So, Jay, what do you think?
That's a good question. Well, first of all, I mean, Mike, you know me, and I don't know if our listeners know me, but I am very much a supporter of the arts.
You're by far the more cultured of the two of us. Yes, you're much more of a high culture guy in terms of music and other stuff. You always have been. You are absolutely a fan of the arts.
You once described me as a cultural elitist.
There you go. Yeah, that sounds about right.
Back in the day. I completely understand that, and I love the reference to Winston Churchill also.
I thought you'd like
that.
And
I think the role of the arts in our country for our and as part of our national spirit, national culture, I think that's tremendously important. Now, to what extent do we talk about funding or defunding the NEA or NPR and so forth? That might be a little bit different question because I think there's a little bit of the saying, well, listen, this is necessary to have a robust arts community in our country, and I disagree with that proposition. I'm not saying the NEA doesn't help. Obviously, it does. It makes a big difference, but we also had a thriving artistic community culture before there was an NEA. So I think the idea that there is a disaster looming if there are cuts, I don't think that's the case. And I think more importantly, from the political standpoint, I don't think there's going to be any significant cuts to any of those organizations. I mean, I think there will be some perhaps reductions, which may well be sensible. But I don't see the whole scale elimination that Trump has put out there. I think that's a bargaining position. And I think there are enough Republicans out there who see value for these institutions, the NEA and NPR and all the other programs that are funded through there. It's a drop in the big budgetary bucket, and it's important to a lot of constituents. So I think it's still going to be maintained. There might be some symbolic cuts here or there, but I don't anticipate it's going to be the end of the world. And even with there are those cuts, I wouldn't say to everyone out there, step up on your own. I mean, that's sort of my theory, and that's a conservative theory, and you can agree or disagree. But I give money to a lot of local arts institutions and local radio stations and so forth, and encourage other folks to the ability they're able to do the same. Because I think that ends up in a better result than just having stuff government directed.
Yeah, well, I certainly agree about the importance of the arts. I couldn't disagree with Winston Churchill, FDR, JFK, and Lyndon Johnson certainly. But I tend to think that government should do more to support the arts, specifically in the role of trying to make high art to make culture available to the great masses of people. I don't think there's ever been a problem with a small elite having access to this. I'd like to see government do much more to kind of bring these important and I think, enriching experiences to a lot more people. That is what I believe the proper government role is here. And I think, as you pointed out, it's just a drop in the bucket. I believe that with a Republican president and a Republican Congress, that there are going to be some pretty significant cuts. But I think that actually government should be spending more money on that if that money is directed at not kind of, just that top 1% elite, but trying to make this sort of culture and arts programming available to the masses of American folks. So
yeah, I want to throw in one more thing, just because this is something that I think is significant with a lot of these arts organizations and how government spends its money on the arts. I think you're right. If this is about broad dissemination of getting kids to symphony orchestras, to supporting local art museums, to those sorts of things. Those are things I think everyone can get behind, and it's expanding the arts to a broader range, and it's not just the 1%. But there was a program that continued even during the sequester years, whereby there was a federal grant for someone to ride on an Amtrak train and sort of write poetry about the journeys across America and discovering the soul of America while riding on Amtrak. This was an actual grant you could apply for. Maybe we should have. But to me, that's just sort of, so many conservatives see this is emblematic of what we're paying a guy to ride on a train, albeit weren't paying him much, I don't think. But again, is that the best use of government money, and could it be spent somewhere else, or it could be just let the guy ride on the train on his own, or seek private funding for it?
There are always questions. You're right about opportunity cost and so forth. And I would say, is the best use of the money to spend, $50-something billion to build up our defense, our military, which is already by far the largest in the world. And I think, far larger than we need it to be. But I tell you, I see your point when we start to get into those really kind of utilitarian arguments. But that's the whole point to me about art, is it's not just about supporting programs that, increase access, but it's also about supporting artists who create these things and who otherwise might not be able to. Now, you and I might not agree with certain grants that have been funded and so forth, but sometimes we're not going to, and that's okay, I think. But
I know, and I guess my point is, if for the NEA and some of these organizations, it would behoove them from a political standpoint to take a harder look at what they're funding and how they're funding it. And if they did fund the bigger pieces, the high culture type stuff that we're talking about, and greater access to that, I think they'd be more politically successful.
You are an elitist, aren't you? The high culture versus the guy. Yeah, so that evaluation still works after all these years. That's good to know. Okay, thanks, Taj, for that great question. I'm sure, Jay, you and I could do an entire show on that, especially given your deep and abiding interest in the arts. That might be fun. All right, finally this week we have Tina, who is another one of our new Patreon monthly supporters. Thank you, Tina. We truly appreciate your help in keeping us going. Now, if you're interested in supporting the show financially, you can do what Taj and Tina and our anonymous supporter did last week. Just go to politicsguys.com and click on either the Patreon or PayPal donation links you'll see there. Every donation helps, no matter what the amount is. And of course, it's especially helpful for us to have continuing monthly supporters, which is something that's really easy to set up in Patreon. And finally, as always, it would be a big help if you could spread the word about the show by sharing and retweeting our new show posts on Facebook and Twitter, and leaving reviews and ratings of the show on iTunes. Okay, moving on. The confirmation process for Judge Neil Gorsuch continues, with the Senate Judiciary Committee scheduled to vote on his nomination on April 3rd, which is, tomorrow. I'd say it's safe to expect a party line committee vote and another mostly party line vote in the Senate as a whole. And now this week, two Senate Democrats, Joe Manchin and Heidi Heitkamp, announced that they might vote to confirm Judge Gorsuch, but that's not going to be enough to stop a Democratic filibuster and then the inevitable Republican response, which is the so-called nuclear option of changing the Senate rules to prohibit filibusters of Supreme Court nominees. This is something, of course, that the Democrats did for all non-Supreme Court nominees back in 2013 when they were the Senate majority. Now, the White House also announced this week that they would no longer involve the American Bar Association in the vetting process. Now, the ABA, which doesn't have a formal role in Supreme Court nominations, has for decades issued ratings of Supreme Court nominees, most recently giving Judge Gorsuch their top rating of well qualified. So, Jay, how do you see all this playing out, and what do you think of the Trump administration kind of throwing the ABA to the curb?
I'd say we ought to throw to the ABA to the curb.
These are your people, right? I mean,
pardon?
Your people.
Mayor. I'll tell you, I am a sometimes ABA member. They keep offering I get a free membership for a year, and you get the magazine and all that, and then it lapses, and then they want more money, and then I quit, and then they offer me a new free membership. So, I mean, I think the ABA can play a role certainly and make statements and do ratings, and the public can take those for what they're worth. But I don't see any reason why they ought to have a formal role in appointing judges.
And they
I
don't.
think they can have the informal role as essentially the industry, so to speak. But I think that's right as far as not having them play an actual official part.
Well, just to be clear, they don't have an official role, but the White House has always at least listened to them and taken those ratings into consideration. The ABA says they're still going to do that. It's just that the White House, I guess, will essentially ignore that. And just for a little bit of background, there are a number of conservatives who feel that the ABA is essentially this pinko liberal organization, and they've pointed to a number of fairly prominent conservative federal judges who have received less than the well-qualified evaluation from the ABA, such as Richard Posner and Frank Easterbrook, who are both very well-regarded conservative federal judges who the ABA.
Well, and I would also say, with someone you were talking about, Posner and Easterbrook, they're also regarded as really kind of intellectual giants.
Yes, exactly.
In their field. So to take shots and to say that they're unqualified, that puts the ABA's credibility sort of at I don't want to say at risk, but makes it questionable. And I think, look, if they want to make ratings, fine, and others can respond that these are the kind of ratings they make, so take it for what it's worth.
Yeah, well, and again, they rated Judge Gorsuch with their highest rating this time, the liberal ABA. So what about the process? Did you agree with my assessment of sort of how it's going to play out?
Yeah, I think that's what's going to happen, and I think that's a shame, and I think that's a mistake on the part of the Democrats. I think they should have, and I suppose there's still time that they may, take the route that, look, we will go ahead and give Gorsuch these 60 votes and let this go and not go to sort of nuclear war, as it were, but save that for the next nominee. The next nominee being the nominee that will actually really change the balance. And likely, let's put it this way, Gorsuch is really a really good nominee for so many reasons. There's a pretty high likelihood that the next nominee, and I don't know, maybe there is someone else who's just as good, but probably won't be. And if I were the Democrats, I'd pick my battles and wait till the next one. But I
agree, but I think that there are probably a lot of Democrats in the Senate who feel the same way. But I think that they're getting a lot of pressure from their base to really be activist on this, and so I think some of them just feel kind of hamstrung about this. So, but yeah, as a matter of longer term strategy, I absolutely agree, and it's unfortunate that this is happening. Jay, just for kind of a change of pace, how about we talk about some actual policy?
That sounds interesting.
Yeah,
yes.
Every once in a while it's good to do. There was a bunch of environmental policy news this week. First, a couple of EPA-related stories. The House voted to restrict the EPA's use of scientific data that's not publicly available, which Republicans claim is all about good science, because Republicans are all about good science. But Democrats say it's intended to hamstring the agency's efforts to use the best scientific data in making decisions. And speaking of scientific data, EPA head Scott Pruitt rejected the conclusion of his agency's own scientific experts about the dangers of a commonly used pesticide, instead siding with manufacturer Dow Chemical, which claims it's safe when used as directed and shouldn't be banned. So what's this administration got against the EPA, Jay?
Why do they hate why do Republicans hate the earth?
Exactly.
No, look, as to the House vote, I mean, I think that's really pretty sensible. I mean, a core of the scientific process is that results are repeatable and ought to be peer reviewed. So I see. I mean, I guess when one side says, okay, we've got the science and we're going to base it on that, can we see it? No, you can't. To me, that's a little troubling, because if it is scientifically correct, then there ought to really be no issue with putting it out there. Now, I understand the issue would be that there would be some non-scientific actors who could take this and misrepresent it to be something that it's not. But I'm still of the mind of more information and more public information is better.
Well, what about, like, for instance, you have a cancer study that takes 30 years to compile the evidence for, and so it would be another 30 years till it's repeatable. So you just wait?
No, but you certainly allow someone else to take a look at that evidence and take a look at that study and take a look at the how it was done, why it was done,
Okay.
what were criticisms of it.
Okay, let me follow that through. That's fair.
Decisions on that. So
that's fair. Let me follow that through then. So now for the EPA to do this, they would have to pay for that information because it's that's a lot of times it's proprietary information. They have to work out deals with people to get this information. Now, so if Republicans,
I would have no objection to whoever wants to get proprietary some information that is, that there's a cost to that they have to pay the cost.
Well, see,
I'm not suggesting that the EPA sort of subsidize handing this out to anybody.
And that's where I think that this is just a smokescreen, because if it were all about the transparency and getting the best data, then the EPA would be given the funds to do this. Instead, the administration's calling for massive cuts in the EPA. And so if you're saying, well, you need to use this data and get this data, but we're going to make sure that you don't have the budget to actually do this, it's basically, again, just handcuffing the agency. If they're serious about it, they should pass this legislation and then say, also, we're going to make sure you have the funding to do this right. But the administration, House Republicans, are going in the exact opposite way.
So yeah, I mean, I guess maybe I'm misunderstanding your position on this, because I think we might agree. At this point, it would be revenue neutral. It's just a matter of the EPA, if they're going to rely on something, has to make sure that what they're relying on is publicly available. Now, I didn't interpret publicly available as to mean publicly available for free, but it's something that is not secret or proprietary to the EPA. Someone else can take a look at it.
What it would mean is that someone else would have to take a look at it, and because some of this data does not have this status, the EPA would have to find a way to compensate the people who own this information, who have this information, and that would cost millions of dollars that the EPA doesn't have. So I'm saying that if Republicans are serious about this, let's pass legislation that says, okay, we expect you to do this for these reasons, but we're going to make sure that you actually have the funding to do it.
Yeah, or I would say the alternative is to say it's sort of just a pass through. If you want this information, here's how much it will cost. I think that's really the perfect, elegant, conservative solution. If someone in the private sector, someone in the public wants this, they can pull together.
Okay, well, and that's
pull the money, raise the money to get it. Now,
sure.
Again, if it comes out that this is somehow, the pricing is so out of whack that it's intended to keep it hidden, that's a different issue. But
and that's not what the legislation says. And I certainly know that you have, for a long time, been, and forever, as far as I know, been a fan of transparency and then more information, as am I. But again, this legislation is written in such a way that it doesn't really achieve what its proponents claim it's ostensibly about. So what about Scott Pruitt just ignoring his own scientific experts and saying, "Oh, I'm sure Dow Chemical's right about this. They're good folks."
Come on, Dow Chemical mixes. Who's going to know better than Dow Chemical?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Scott Pruitt. We've talked about this before. He's a guy who's made a career out of suing the EPA, and this is Republicans in general, conservatives in general, have major issues with the EPA and have had since the 70s, really.
Right. Well, since its creation. No, I'd agree with that. I'll tell you what, I will admit I don't have the depth to really talk to, this issue on what Pruitt recommended and didn't recommend. But certainly it's troubling if the government is just going to say, we're going to ignore our own people and take what the industry says as gospel. That's not to say that you shouldn't take what the industry says and consider it.
Absolutely.
Because I think you should. Now, I think there may be some sort of balance in there somewhere between. Likewise, I don't think you should simply take what the EPA folks say as gospel when the industry tells you something different. Again, to me, that's the whole nature of science. If you have two competing views, then okay, let's put them to the test.
I don't disagree with that at all. You're right, Jay.
So,
yeah. Also this week, more environmental news. President Trump issued an executive order, did a bunch of stuff. Some of the main things, I think, number one, it lifts the ban on new coal mining on federal lands. It instructs federal agencies to ignore previously established social cost of carbon figure. I think it's $36 per, I want to say metric ton or something. That's been used to estimate the cost and benefits of environmental regulation. And it starts the process of repealing the Obama administration's Clean Power Plan, which would have resulted in hundreds of coal-burning power plants being closed, as well as major growth in clean power alternatives like wind and solar. Now, the plan actually hasn't gone into effect because it's been held up in the courts to this point, which is a very common fate for new regulations that industry doesn't like. And energy experts and energy companies, for that matter, don't really see this as having as big of an effect on jobs as the president claims it will have for two main reasons. Number one, automation means that companies can mine more coal with fewer workers. And second, other fossil fuels, particularly natural gas, are now more cost effective than coal. So what do you think about this executive order and its ramifications, Jay?
Oh, I think it's okay. Yes, I guess that's the easiest way to put it. He's keeping a campaign promise to open up, to be more friendly to the coal industry. He was pretty upfront with that in his campaign. And as you remember, I mean, Barack Obama was pretty upfront with saying he'd like to bankrupt the coal industry. So I don't think it's any surprise, in terms of jobs, will it have an effect? You're probably right. The automation has changed a lot, but I think there's still going to be some job increase. Now, I don't have the numbers to say here's what it's going to be, but we're opening that up and we're keeping more energy options open. And I think that's a good thing.
Well, and but what about this? There is people on both sides of the political spectrum, or on all sides of the political spectrum, would agree that there is, in fact, a social cost to carbon. Maybe Scott Pruitt wouldn't agree with that. I don't know. But what we mean by social cost to carbon is that most folks would agree that by burning any fossil fuel, you create certain externalities, certain costs in the future that need to be accounted for. And prior to this, under the Obama administration, they formed a working group that determined what they felt was a correct, fair social cost for carbon. And that number was used in trying to figure out, well, if we regulate the fossil fuel industry, what will be the cost and what will be the benefits. That was weighed into the formula, as well it should be, because there's no such thing as a free lunch, and you can't burn fossil fuels without incurring certain negative costs in terms of environmental degradation. You'd agree with that, right, Jay?
Well, I mean,
Really?
I'm not sure what all goes into the social cost.
No, I'm not saying. I'm just in general the principle.
To me, look, I mean, if you're saying, this burning this metric ton of coal will result in costs because increased insurance costs because there will be global warming, which increases the likelihood of a hurricane, and this will. I mean, to me, that seems pretty. I don't want to say far-fetched, but I think there's a lot of extrapolations in there, which may or may not come true. And to me,
sure, but you agree the cost isn't zero.
I see this as sort of a minor issue, also in terms of what does it really. What's it really going to do at the end of the day?
So then would you then also agree that companies should be allowed to dump waste in waterways because, there's no social, I mean, it's a similar thing. Take a look at the air.
Yes, just pour the waste
but
into
that's
the
my
waterways,
point
yeah.
is, for instance, if you take a look at the air on oftentimes many days above, a Beijing or something like that, or a lot of places where there's so much fall. I mean, there are some pretty clear effects here in terms of air quality, in terms of respiratory health and so forth. These things are undeniable, even if we don't talk about climate change.
All right. So, what I get you saying, and again, I have no idea what social cost number that Beijing uses for coal, or that the air over Beijing is necessarily a product of coal burning, and let's stipulate that part of it is. But all right, if you want to say that attribute some social cost to increased smog in certain areas, again, maybe that's an easy number to assign. But I think what the administration is saying is we're not using the old number. Go back and refigure it. Let's and I don't think that's unreasonable.
No,
I don't think that's the equivalent of pouring waste into the waterways.
No, we needed to. We were talking.
We're talking about things like particulates in coal and so forth. Which a lot of this was addressed by the Clean Air Act back in 1990. It's one thing to say here's the pollution that comes from coal. That is the parts of the coal that aren't efficiently burned and are then put up in the atmosphere. But the chemical reaction part of it, of you burn carbon and you get carbon dioxide, that's something different. And again, I would say the one is easier to measure than the other, at least as far as its actual effect. And
no, I agree with you on that. But I think we were just kind of talking past each other a little bit there, but where I think, reasonable people can disagree about what the social costs of fossil fuels are. And certainly, I would say it's fair to say that liberals probably rate them a lot higher than conservatives would. But the point I was making is that there is, in fact, a cost. And so it's not just the question of more jobs versus fewer jobs. There are other factors to consider. And
right. I would agree that there is. There's no such thing as a free lunch,
exactly.
And there's always a trade-off.
And my concern, and I think a reasonable concern, is that what we're doing is we're putting these costs on future generations, saying that we'll let them worry about it, and that's, I think, a deeply unfair sort of thing to do.
Okay. Well, again, that's where I think we disagree, because I could see it's an easier measurement to say here are the current costs, where we can measure pollutants coming out of a smokestack and tie that to health concerns or smog, versus here's a prediction of what could happen, with a 1 degree temperature raise 100 years from now.
No, and I see the science on that is definitely a lot more speculative. You're absolutely right about that. So
that was the word I was looking for, speculative.
There you go. I'm happy to help out. So, one final story today, I'm hoping we could talk about some foreign policy news. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson was in Brussels this week to meet with NATO ministers, and I think two big things came out of this meeting. First, Tillerson's comments making it clear that Russia is no friend to the United States, but rather an aggressive strategic competitor. Second was his claim that other NATO members haven't been pulling their weight, which has been a common refrain from President Trump. Specifically, Tillerson said members should live up to their commitment to spend about 2% of their country's GDP on defense, a goal that the U.S. easily meets, but that most other NATO members haven't hit yet. Now, the response was not good. In fact, Germany's representative saying the idea that they'd spend 2% of their GDP on defense was nonsense, and that other security spending, such as large amounts many countries spend on refugee-related issues, for instance, should be considered as part of the total. So, Jay, first off, any thoughts on Tillerson's comments on Russia? And do you agree, secondly, that other NATO countries are coasting off the United States?
Yes and yes. I would say Tillerson, good on him. If the concern has been that the Trump administration is going to somehow be soft on Russia, I mean, these are the kind of statements that they need to make. And I think that description of Russia is accurate. So, I think that's almost a shift in our view towards Russia. Which, again, you had the reset era, you had the more flexibility era, and, the 80s call, they want their foreign policy back, all that sort of stuff. Now to say, no, look, we view Russia as a serious competitor, I think is a good way to put it. Not necessarily an enemy, but certainly a country that doesn't have our best interests at heart.
That's for sure.
And is aggressive in pushing out there. So, no, I think that's the good statement to make, and that reinforces the need to have a strong NATO. And to have a strong NATO, you need to have other members pulling their weight. So I think that's a completely reasonable request for Tillerson to ask these other countries to step up and honor the commitments that they made. Again, it's one of these.
And right now, just to be
painted as radical of as Trump threatening to pull out of NATO. No, it's saying, look, this was the deal, and it's not unreasonable to expect these other nations to honor that deal.
Yeah, and this was a commitment that on several occasions NATO members said that they would shoot for, and there are a few who are at that level. The United States, I already mentioned. Britain is pretty much at that level. France is pretty much at that level. But then after Turkey, but they're obviously a lot smaller economy, and Greece, again, a lot smaller economy. But pretty much everyone else has not come close to that. And Germany, of course, is particularly important because they have, I think, one of the top 5
Germany
economies.
has the economic strength to make that kind of contribution.
Exactly. They could easily do that.
And the leadership role in Europe to step up to that. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's something I think that, Jay, you and I have talked about before. We both agree that is one of the more reasonable suggestions, demands, requests, what have you, of the Trump administration, that these other countries in the alliance do what they say that they wanted to do, or they committed themselves to do. Though that said, I also think that the German minister might have a point in that, well, what do we count as security spending or defense spending? Now, you can look at it a number of ways. Is it just what you spend on your military? Or are there other security-related issues like refugee issues, which certainly are linked to that maybe should at least be factored into that in some way? And I think it's reasonable to have a conversation about that and not just make it it's all about what you spend on your military.
Yeah, no, and I think that makes sense. I mean, and also I would say there are probably some countries that are better equipped to make more contributions that are non-traditional military, and can do more in terms of diplomatic and other ways there. So absolutely, let's have that discussion, but let's still make sure that everyone is contributing in a meaningful way.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely, I agree. Well, on that note of concord, I think we'll wrap it up for this week.
All right.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. And if you have any thoughts, comments, criticisms, or questions for Ask the Politics Guys, we'd love to hear from you. Our email is mail@politicsguys.com. Our Facebook page, where we post throughout the week, is facebook.com/politicsguys page. We're also on Twitter @politicsguys. And we'd really appreciate it if you could subscribe to the show, leave a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or whatever podcast service you use. And sharing and retweeting our new show posts and tweets also helps out a lot. And if you'd like to support the show financially, you can do that through the Patreon or PayPal links on our website. The Politics Guys will be back next Sunday. We hope you'll join us.